Millionaire finds a familiar person living on the streets. An unexpected help reveals secrets from the past. A disturbing discovery appears in confidential documents. An unexpected meeting changes the fate of two lives. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know which city you're watching from. Michael Andrews adjusted his navy blue tie as he observed the Hope Valley community through the window of his Range Rover. The simple houses and narrow streets contrasted drastically with the luxurious office he had just left in the business center of New York City. At 45 years old, the businessman had built an empire from scratch, transforming Andrews' developments into one of the largest real estate companies in the country. His driver parked near an improvised community center where a small crowd was already waiting for his arrival. Michael took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the presentation of the housing project that would change the lives of hundreds of families. This wasn't just another development, it was part of his personal mission of social transformation. As he walked among the residents, greeting them with his characteristic serene smile, Michael couldn't help but let his mind wander back 12 years in time. The emotional scars from that period still stung when touched. The unjust conviction, the 18 months in prison, the public humiliation, all because of a fabricated accusation of embezzlement in a previous social project. The severe face of Judge Hannah Morrison still visited his nightmares occasionally. Her cold voice echoed in his memory. "I sentence the defendant to 4 years in prison. If it weren't for the evidence discovered later that proved his innocence, his life would have been completely destroyed." Even so, the damage to his reputation took years to repair. The project presentation went as planned. Michael passionately explained how the new homes would be built, keeping families together and preserving community ties. His eyes shone as he talked about the recreational areas, the daycare center, and the vocational training center that would be implemented. It was during the Q&A session that his world stopped for a moment. Among the dozens of faces in the audience, one in particular caught his attention. She was older, marked by time and suffering, but unmistakable. Hannah Morrison, the former judge, was sitting in the last row, wearing simple, worn clothes. Michael felt his stomach churn. His voice faltered for a moment, but years of experience in presentations helped him maintain his composure. He continued answering questions, although his mind was in turmoil. What was she doing there? How had the powerful magistrate ended up among the city's neediest residents? After the presentation, he discreetly asked Paul, his most trusted assistant, to investigate Hannah's current situation. As he returned to his car, he observed her from afar. She seemed smaller, more fragile, completely different from the imposing figure who had sentenced him years ago. On the way back to the office, information began to arrive on his cell phone. Hannah Morrison had lost everything 2 years ago, the victim of an elaborate financial scam. Her house, her savings, everything had disappeared. The investigation process had mysteriously cooled off, leaving her without resources and without answers. Michael spent the night sleepless in his penthouse in Upper East Side, turning this irony of fate over in his mind. The woman who had almost destroyed his life was now at rock bottom. It would be easy to ignore, turn his back, consider it poetic justice. But something inside him didn't allow for such simplicity. The next morning, he made a decision that would change not only his life, but trigger a series of events that no one could have predicted. He called the Human Resources Department and, using a fictitious name, arranged for a position as an administrative assistant for Hannah in one of the group's companies. What Michael didn't know was that this decision, apparently motivated by a mixture of curiosity and perhaps a veiled desire for redemption, would place him at the center of a plot much larger than his old history with the ex-judge. The gears of fate were beginning to move, and the past he had tried so hard to bury was about to emerge with full force. Hannah Morrison stared at the commercial building in Midtown Manhattan with a mixture of anxiety and resignation. The beige blazer, bought at a department store with her last savings, couldn't completely hide the wear of her clothes. Her hands, once adorned with expensive rings, now nervously held a simple folder containing her documents. The job interview for the administrative assistant position at Andrews Services, one of the companies in the business group, represented her last hope. At 52, after 2 years living on favors in the house of a former employee in Hope Valley, Hannah had learned the bitter taste of humility. "Ms. Hannah Morrison?" called the receptionist. "Ms." Marcia Davis from HR is waiting. The selection process was surprisingly quick. Marcia, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, seemed not to recognize her name, something that still caused discomfort for Hannah, accustomed as she was to being immediately identified in legal circles. The irony didn't escape her. Now anonymity was her greatest blessing. "Your credentials are interesting," commented Marcia, analyzing her carefully edited resume. "Experience in management, document organization, legal knowledge. I believe you'll fit perfectly into the position." Hannah felt a lump in her throat. Every word on her resume was true, but the context had been carefully omitted. How to explain that her management experience came from administering a judicial chamber, that her legal knowledge was the result of decades as a magistrate? As she left the building with a letter of hire in her hands, Hannah allowed herself a moment of relief. The salary was modest, but it meant independence, dignity. As she waited for the bus, her mind wandered to the housing project presentation she had attended days before. She couldn't forget the imposing figure of Michael Andrews, the man she had unjustly convicted years ago. Her first day of work arrived quickly. Hannah was assigned to the archive department, organizing old company documents. The work was methodical, solitary, perfect for someone who preferred to go unnoticed. However, something in the documents passing through her hands began to catch her attention. During lunch, alone at her table in the employee cafeteria, Hannah discreetly observed the comings and goings of executives and their conversations. Fragments of information about new projects, important meetings, and corporate decisions floated around her. Her investigative instinct, dormant in recent years, began to awaken. It was on one of these afternoons, immersed in piles of documents, that Hannah found something intriguing. Her series of old contracts showed subtle inconsistencies, patterns that only someone with her legal experience could notice. Names that repeated in different companies, dates that didn't align, signatures with small variations. The name of Robert Miller, the magnate who had orchestrated her ruin, appeared discreetly in some of these documents, always through subsidiary companies or business partners. Hannah felt a chill. The connections began to form in her mind, like pieces of a dark puzzle. That night, in her small room in the simple house in Hope Valley, Hannah couldn't sleep. Memories of the scam that destroyed her life mingled with recent discoveries. Robert Miller had been a respected name in the business world, known for his political connections and his empire built in the energy sector. The same man who, through an elaborate fraud, had appropriated all her savings. What Hannah didn't know was that, in the luxurious presidential office, Michael Andrews was following her every move through discreet reports from his trusted employees. The businessman watched with growing interest as his former nemesis dealt with her new reality, unsuspecting that both were about to discover that their fates were much more intertwined than they imagined. The shadows of the past began to lengthen, projecting onto the present with an intensity that neither was prepared to face. And, somewhere in the city, Robert Miller continued moving his pieces in a game much larger and more dangerous than anyone could suspect. The sun had barely risen when Michael Andrews arrived at his office on the top floor of Andrews Development's headquarters. The day promised to be hectic, with a series of important meetings and crucial decisions to be made. However, before diving into the frenzied routine, he allowed himself a few minutes to review the reports on Hannah Morrison. Sitting in his leather armchair, Michael flipped through the pages with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The information was surprising. Hannah was adapting well to the work, demonstrating above-average efficiency. But what really caught his attention were the notes about her interest in certain old company documents. "She's connecting the dots," Michael muttered to himself, a wrinkle of concern forming on his forehead. He knew that the files Hannah had access to contained potentially compromising information, not just about his own company, but about an intricate network of businesses that extended across various sectors of the American economy. Meanwhile, in the basement of the same building, Hannah was starting another day of work. Her skilled hands organized documents with precision, but her mind was miles away, weaving connections between the information she had discovered in recent days. "Good morning, Hannah," greeted Charlie, a young intern who often worked in the archive. "I brought some more boxes from the stockroom. The HR folks said they're old records that need to be digitized." Hannah thanked him with a polite smile, but her eyes lit up when she saw the labels on the boxes. Contracts 2008, 2010, precisely the period when her life began to crumble. As the hours passed, Hannah delved deeper and deeper into the documents. Names, dates, and values danced before her eyes, forming a complex puzzle. At various moments, she found subtle references to companies she knew were linked to Robert Miller, the man responsible for her ruin. In the middle of the afternoon, a discovery made her freeze. A partnership contract between a subsidiary of Andrews Developments and a company she recognized as being a front used in the scheme that destroyed her. The dates coincided perfectly with the period of Michael Andrews' unjust conviction. "It can't be," Hannah whispered, feeling her heart race. The possibility that Michael Andrews could be involved with Robert Miller was disturbing. Was it possible that the man she had unjustly convicted was actually connected to the true criminal? Several floors above, Michael was concluding a tense video conference with international investors when his cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Paul, his trusted assistant. "She found the Nexus contract. We need to talk urgently." Michael felt his blood run cold. Nexus Enterprises was the weakest link in the entire web of businesses he had inherited from his mentor, the late Richard Andrews. It was also the most direct connection to Robert Miller's shadowy operations. At that moment, both Michael and Hannah were caught in a moral and emotional crossroads. Hannah struggled with renewed guilt over her past conviction and growing suspicion about her current employer. Michael, in turn, faced the dilemma of protecting the secrets that sustained his empire or embracing the truth, running the risk of losing everything. The businessman cancelled his commitments for the rest of the day and locked himself in his office, mentally reviewing all possible scenarios. He knew Hannah was too intelligent not to realize the importance of what she had discovered. The question now was, what would she do with this information? Meanwhile, in her small apartment in Hope Valley, Hannah spent the night awake, analyzing her options. Reporting her discoveries could mean losing the job she so desperately needed. Staying silent would be betraying her ethical principles, the same ones that had guided her throughout her career in the judiciary. What neither of them knew was that their actions were being closely observed. In a luxurious penthouse in the Upper West Side, Robert Miller sipped a glass of whiskey while observing the city lights. A cold smile formed on his lips when his cell phone rang. "Yes," he answered, his voice calm and controlled. "Sir, we have interesting movements at Andrews. The ex-judge is digging deep." Robert paused, savoring the moment. "Excellent. Keep me informed. It might be time to tighten some screws." As night fell over New York City, three destinies intertwined in a dangerous dance. Michael, Hannah, and Robert, each in their corner of the city, prepared for a confrontation that promised to shake the structures of power and reveal long-buried truths. The following morning would bring decisions that would change their lives forever, and none of them was truly prepared for the revelations that were to come. Morning arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Michael Andrews adjusted his tie as the elevator ascended towards his office. His mind was full of strategies and counter-strategies, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Hannah. In the basement, Hannah hesitated for a moment before swiping her badge at the entrance turnstile. Her folder contained copies of the most relevant documents she had found. She knew that what she would do today could change the course of her life once again. The day passed with a superficial calm, but both Michael and Hannah felt the storm approaching. It was at the end of the afternoon that everything came to a head. "Ms. Morrison, Mr. Andrews would like to see you in his office," announced Michael's secretary, catching Hannah by surprise. Hannah's heart raced as the elevator climbed. As she entered the spacious office with a view of the city, she found herself face to face with the man she had unjustly convicted years ago. Michael greeted her with a tense smile. "Please, have a seat," he indicated, his voice controlled. "I believe we have a lot to talk about." Hannah took her place, maintaining a rigid posture. "Mr. Andrews, I imagine you know the reason for this summons." Michael nodded slowly. "You found the Nexus contracts." A heavy silence settled in the room. It was Hannah who broke it, her voice trembling slightly. "I made a terrible mistake in convicting you years ago, a mistake that haunts me to this day. But now I see connections that I cannot ignore." Michael stood up, walking to the window. The city stretched out below, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that room. "Hannah, things are not always what they seem." What you saw are just fragments of a much bigger story. A story that involves Robert Miller, Hannah pressed, carefully observing Michael's reaction. The businessman turned, his eyes meeting hers. Yes, Robert Miller is at the center of all this, but not in the way you imagine. In the following minutes, Michael revealed to Hannah a complex plot that dated back decades. He explained how his mentor, Richard Andrews, had become involved with Miller in shady businesses, creating a network of companies and contracts that bordered on the line of legality. When I inherited the company, I also inherited these schemes, Michael confessed, his voice heavy with remorse. I spent years trying to dismantle this structure, but it's like a spider's web. The more you struggle, the more trapped you become. Hannah listened, stunned. Her judge's mind worked furiously, connecting dots, seeing the bigger picture. Your conviction, was it retaliation from Miller? Michael nodded. I was getting too close to exposing some of his operations. My conviction was a message, a warning for me to back off. The revelation hit Hannah like a punch. She had been not only unjust, but an involuntary piece in a much larger game. My God, I was used. As was I, Michael responded softly. And now, you're also in his crosshairs. Your financial accident wasn't accidental, Hannah. The implications of this statement made Hannah pale. Her entire life, her fall, everything was part of a larger plan. What do we do now? She asked, her voice finding a new determination. Michael approached, his eyes shining with a mixture of determination and caution. We have two options. We can pretend this conversation never happened, you keep your job, I continue my silent struggle, or we can join forces and face Miller head-on. Hannah stood up, facing Michael. Years of resentment and guilt dissolved, replaced by a common purpose. I think I've been silent for too long, Mr. Andrews. A slight smile formed on Michael's lips. Call me Michael. I think after everything we deserve that intimacy. As the two began to devise a plan, at another point in the city, Robert Miller received a call. Sir, we have a problem. Andrews and the ex-judge have been talking for hours in his office. Miller frowned, his mind quickly calculating. Activate the contingency plan. It's time to increase the pressure. The sun was setting over New York City, casting long shadows across the skyscrapers. In Michael's office, two unlikely people formed an alliance that promised to shake the structures of power in the city. The real battle was just beginning, and the fate of many hung in the balance. The hours that followed Hannah's explosive testimony at the congressional hearing were a whirlwind of frantic activity. The Capitol buzzed with emergency meetings, while the media entered an unprecedented frenzy. Social media exploded with hashtags related to the case, and spontaneous demonstrations began to form in front of government buildings across the country. Michael and Hannah were quickly escorted out of the building by FBI agents, who now feared for their safety. In an armored car crossing the agitated streets of Washington, D.C., the two exchanged tense glances. There's no turning back now, said Michael, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. Hannah nodded, clutching the folder with the evidence against her chest. We need to ensure these proofs reach the right authorities. Miller will do everything to silence us. Meanwhile, in Robert Miller's luxurious penthouse in New York City, the magnate orchestrated a desperate operation to contain the damage. Phones rang incessantly, orders were given in urgent tones, and a team of elite lawyers worked furiously to develop defense strategies. I want all our media contacts mobilized now, shouted Miller, his normally composed face now contorted with fury. Discredit this woman, find something, anything from her past that we can use. His closest advisor, visibly nervous, approached. Sir, we have a bigger problem. The FBI has just issued search and seizure warrants for all our companies. And there are rumors of an arrest warrant against you. Miller froze, the reality of the situation finally dawning on him. Years of building his empire, manipulating the corridors of power, and now everything threatened to crumble in a matter of hours. Back to Michael and Helen, the armored car took them to a secure location on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. A discreet house guarded by federal agents would be their temporary refuge while authorities processed the information and evidence provided. Exhausted but still alert, the two sat in the simple living room, the TV on showing incessant coverage of the day's events. Do you think we did the right thing? Helen asked, doubt momentarily clouding her determination. Michael took her hand, a gesture that had become natural in recent days. I'm sure we did. What we revealed today, it's bigger than both of us. It's about restoring the integrity of an entire system. As they talked, Michael's cell phone vibrated with a message from Paul, his loyal assistant. "Boss, things are crazy here. The police are at the company, but we're cooperating fully. The employees are with you. Stay safe." A tired smile formed on Michael's lips. Even in the midst of chaos, it was comforting to know there was still loyalty and integrity in his team. The night progressed, and with it, the repercussions of the bombshell revelation multiplied. News of arrests of corrupt judges and politicians involved in the scheme began to pop up. Robert Miller's name was mentioned in every bulletin, his photo plastered across all online newspapers. Around midnight, a knock on the door made Michael and Helen jump. A federal agent entered, his expression serious. "Mr. Anderson, Ms. Harrison, we have news," he said. "Robert Miller was seen boarding a private jet at Reagan National Airport an hour ago. We're in contact with Interpol, but..." Helen felt a knot in her stomach. "He's running," the agent nodded. "Yes, but don't worry. His accounts have been frozen, his assets are being seized. He may be fleeing, but to a much smaller world than he was used to." The following hours were an emotional roller coaster. Michael and Helen watched, stunned as the entire country seemed to wake up to the magnitude of the scandal they had exposed. Politicians from all spectrums were calling for broader investigations. The population demanded answers, and the judicial system faced its biggest credibility test in decades. As the sun began to rise, tinting the Washington, D.C. sky with shades of pink and orange, Michael and Helen found themselves on the porch of the safe house, a cup of coffee in hand, looking towards the horizon. "What happens now?" Helen asked, her soft voice breaking the morning silence. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the sunrise. "Now, Helen, we begin to rebuild, not just our lives, but people's trust in institutions. It will be a long and difficult road, but..." He turned to her, a glimmer of determination in his tired eyes. "But if we've made it this far, I know we can face anything that comes our way." Helen smiled, feeling a wave of hope despite all the fatigue. The day that was dawning brought not just a new sunrise, but the promise of a future where justice and integrity could finally prevail. The months following the explosive revelation at the congressional hearing were a roller coaster of events for Michael, Helen, and the entire country. The scandal, which became known as Operation Spider's Web, triggered a series of investigations that shook the structures of power at all levels. Michael Anderson, initially viewed with suspicion, emerged as a central figure in the fight against corruption. His company, Anderson Developments, underwent an extensive audit which, in the end, proved its integrity. The process of rebuilding the company's reputation was arduous, but Michael led with transparency and determination. Helen Harrison, in turn, became a symbol of redemption and courage. Her decision to expose the truth, even at the cost of her own reputation, inspired others within the judicial system to speak out. A wave of self-cleaning swept through courts across the country, with corrupt judges being removed and prosecuted. On a sunny spring afternoon, almost a year after the testimony at the hearing, Michael and Helen met at the same cafe in Georgetown where they had planned their first steps against Miller. "Sometimes I still can't believe everything that happened," Helen said, a serene smile on her face, very different from the tense expression she had carried a year ago. Michael nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of weariness and satisfaction. "It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? But look where we've come." And indeed, the changes were palpable. Operation Spider's Web had unfolded into dozens of other investigations. Corrupt politicians were arrested. Companies involved in illegal schemes were fined and restructured. Most impressive, however, was the change in the population's attitude. "I saw a poll today," Michael commented, taking a sip of his coffee. "Trust in institutions is at its highest level in the last 20 years. People are more engaged, more vigilant." Helen smiled, remembering the peaceful protests that had taken to the streets in previous months, demanding reforms and greater transparency. It's as if the country had awakened from a long sleep. Robert Miller's whereabouts were still a mystery. Rumors placed him in various countries, always one step ahead of international authorities. His assets in the United States had been confiscated, and part of them was being used to compensate victims of his schemes. "I heard you were invited to lead the Judicial Reform Commission," Michael commented, a tone of pride in his voice. Helen blushed slightly. Yes, it's an enormous responsibility, but after everything we've been through, I feel it's my duty to contribute to this reconstruction. Michael took her hand on the table, a gesture that now carried a deeper meaning. In the months of struggle and rebuilding, the two had grown closer in a way neither of them had initially expected. And you? Helen asked. The new Anderson Developments projects are causing quite a stir. Michael smiled, his eyes shining with renewed enthusiasm. It's amazing how, when you clear the ground of corruption, real opportunities to make a difference arise. Our affordable housing project in Hope Valley is advancing rapidly, and we have plans to expand to other communities. The conversation flowed naturally, covering personal and professional topics. They talked about the challenges they still faced, the occasional threats, the constant pressure from the media, the doubts that sometimes haunted them late at night. But in every word, in every exchanged glance, there was an unshakable certainty that they had done the right thing. As the sun began to set, painting the Washington, D.C. sky with shades of orange and pink, Michael and Helen decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The streets of Georgetown were full of life, with people coming and going, living their everyday lives. You know, Michael said as they walked hand in hand, in the midst of all the chaos of the last few months, I sometimes wonder if it was all worth it. Helen stopped, turning to face him. And what's your conclusion? Michael looked around, at the people on the streets, at the buildings rising against the twilight sky, at the future opening up before them. Then he turned his gaze to Helen, the woman who had been his adversary, his ally, and now much more. It was worth every second, he replied, his voice laden with emotion. Not just for the good we've done, but for everything we've gained in the process. Including this, he gently squeezed her hand. Helen smiled, feeling a wave of emotion envelop her. I completely agree. The path was difficult, but it brought us exactly where we should be. As they resumed their walk, Michael and Helen knew there was still much work ahead. The fight against corruption, rebuilding trust in institutions, developing projects that really made a difference in people's lives. All of these were constant challenges. But now they faced these challenges not only with determination and courage, but with the strength that came from their partnership, both professional and personal. The journey that had begun with mistrust and resentment had transformed into a story of redemption, growth, and, surprisingly, love. The sun finally set, but for Michael and Helen, it was as if a new day was just beginning. A day full of possibilities, hope, and the certainty that no matter how difficult the path, they would walk it together. And so, walking through the streets of a Washington, D.C. that seemed to be reborn along with them, Michael Anderson and Helen Harrison prepared for the next chapter of their lives. A chapter that promised to be as challenging as it was rewarding, written with the ink of integrity, justice, and a love that had blossomed in the most unlikely circumstances. The future, with all its uncertainties and promises, awaited them, and they were ready to face it side by side with the strength that only those who have faced the storm and emerged stronger can have. As Michael and Helen continued their evening stroll through Georgetown, they found themselves reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. The cool breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms, a fitting symbol of renewal and hope. You know, Michael, Helen mused, her eyes twinkling with a mix of nostalgia and excitement. A year ago, if someone had told me we'd be here, like this, I would have thought they were crazy. Michael chuckled, squeezing her hand gently. Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? Who would have thought that my wrongful conviction would lead to uncovering a massive conspiracy and, well, us? They paused at a small park, taking a seat on a bench overlooking the Potomac River. The city lights sparkled on the water's surface, creating a mesmerizing display. I've been thinking, Helen said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. With all the changes happening in the justice system, I've received an offer to teach ethics and law at Georgetown University. It's a chance to shape the next generation of legal professionals, to instill the values we've fought so hard to uphold. Michael's face lit up with pride. Helen, that's wonderful. You'd be perfect for that role. Your experience, both the good and the bad, gives you a unique perspective that these students desperately need. Helen nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. I'm seriously considering it. But what about you? I know Anderson Developments is thriving, but is that enough? Michael leaned back, his gaze distant as he considered her question. You know, for the longest time I thought success was measured by the size of my company, by the profits we generated. But this past year has shown me there's so much more to life, to business. He turned to face Helen, his eyes shining with renewed purpose. I'm thinking of establishing a foundation, one that focuses on corporate ethics and transparency. We could work with companies, government agencies, even educational institutions to promote ethical business practices and fight corruption at its roots. Helen's eyes widened with excitement. Michael, that's brilliant. It would be a perfect way to leverage your experience and influence for positive change. As they discussed the possibilities, their excitement grew. They envisioned workshops, seminars, and mentorship programs. The foundation could partner with Helen's university courses, providing real-world case studies and internship opportunities for students. We could even create a whistleblower support program, Helen suggested. Provide legal and emotional support for those who choose to speak out against corruption, just like we did. Michael nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. And we could work on policy recommendations, pushing for stronger anti-corruption legislation and better protection for those who expose wrongdoing. As their plans took shape, they realized that their journey was far from over. In fact, it felt like they were standing on the threshold of something even bigger, more impactful than they had initially imagined. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Helen accepted the teaching position at Georgetown, throwing herself into curriculum development with the same passion she had once applied to her judicial duties. Her classes quickly became some of the most popular on campus, with students drawn to her real-world experience and unwavering commitment to ethics. Michael, meanwhile, set the wheels in motion for the Anderson Ethics Foundation. He assembled a board of directors that included respected business leaders, legal experts, and anti-corruption activists. The foundation's announcement was met with widespread approval and support, seen as a bold step towards fostering a new era of corporate responsibility. Their personal relationship continued to blossom amidst their professional endeavors. They found a balance between their demanding careers and their growing love for each other. Weekends were often spent discussing cases, brainstorming ideas for the foundation, or simply enjoying each other's company in the quiet moments between their hectic schedules. One crisp autumn evening, as they walked hand in hand through the campus of Georgetown University, Michael suddenly stopped. Helen turned to him, curious about the serious expression on his face. "Helen," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "this past year has been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. We've faced incredible odds, brought down corrupt powers, and in the process, found each other." Helen's heart began to race as Michael dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box from his pocket. "You've been my adversary, my ally, my partner, and my love. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you continue this journey with me, fighting for justice and building a better world side by side?" Tears welled up in Helen's eyes as she looked down at the man who had become her everything. "Yes, Mike, 1,000 times yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted around them. They looked up to see a crowd of students and faculty who had gathered, drawn by the romantic scene unfolding before them. In that moment, surrounded by the next generation of leaders they were helping to shape, Michael and Helen felt an overwhelming sense of hope and purpose. They had not only found love in the most unexpected of circumstances, but had also discovered a shared mission that would impact countless lives. As news of their engagement spread, it seemed to symbolize more than just a personal union. To many, it represented the triumph of integrity over corruption, of perseverance over adversity. Michael and Helen became living proof that even in the darkest times, light could prevail. The coming years would bring new challenges, new battles against entrenched corruption, and new opportunities to make a difference. But whatever lay ahead, Michael and Helen knew they would face it together, their love and shared commitment to justice serving as a beacon of hope in an often troubled world. As they walked back to their apartment that night, hand in hand, they felt a sense of excitement for the future. The path ahead was uncertain, but they were ready to walk it together, continuing their fight for a more just and ethical world, one step at a time. The story of Michael Anderson and Helen Harrison was far from over. In fact, it felt like a new chapter was just beginning, one filled with promise, purpose, and the power of love to overcome even the greatest of obstacles. In the months that followed their engagement, Michael and Helen found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Their personal happiness seemed to fuel their professional endeavors, creating a synergy that inspired those around them. Helen's classes at Georgetown University quickly gained a reputation for being both challenging and transformative. She didn't just teach the letter of the law, she instilled in her students a deep understanding of the ethical considerations that underpin the legal system. Guest lectures from Michael and other key figures from the Anderson Ethics Foundation brought real-world perspectives that captivated the students. One particularly memorable class focused on the ethical dilemmas faced during the Spiders web case. Helen and Michael co-presented, offering insights into the personal and professional challenges they encountered. The students were riveted, many leaving the lecture hall with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper appreciation for the complexities of ethical decision-making in the real world. Meanwhile, the Anderson Ethics Foundation was making waves in the corporate world. Michael's vision of promoting transparency and ethical business practices was resonating with a new generation of business leaders eager to break from the corrupt practices of the past. The Foundation's workshops and seminars were consistently oversubscribed, and their policy recommendations were gaining traction in Washington. One of the Foundation's most impactful initiatives was the Whistleblower Protection Program. Drawing from their own experiences, Michael and Helen designed a comprehensive support system for individuals brave enough to speak out against corruption. The program offered legal advice, financial support, and counseling services to whistleblowers and their families. As the wedding day approached, Michael and Helen found themselves reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them together. They decided on a small, intimate ceremony in the Georgetown University chapel, surrounded by close friends, family, and a select group of students who had become like family to them. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day in Washington, D.C. As Helen walked down the aisle, radiant in a simple yet elegant gown, Michael felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. Their vows, written by themselves, spoke not just of their love for each other, but of their shared commitment to justice and their dream of a more ethical world. I, Michael, take you, Helen, to be my wife, my partner in life and my one true love. I promise to stand by your side in our fight for justice, to support you in times of challenge, and to celebrate with you in times of triumph. Together, we will continue to build a legacy of integrity and compassion. Helen's voice trembled slightly as she reciprocated, I, Helen, take you, Michael, as my husband, my ally in all of life's battles, and my soulmate. I vow to be your steadfast support, your honest critic when needed, and your biggest cheerleader. Together, we will face whatever challenges come our way, always striving to make the world a little bit better. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the chapel erupted in applause. It was a moment of pure joy, a celebration not just of their love, but of the values they stood for and the future they were committed to building together. The reception that followed was a lively affair, filled with laughter, heartfelt toasts, and an atmosphere of hope. Friends, family, and even some former adversaries who had come to respect Michael and Hannah's integrity gathered to celebrate their union. As the newlyweds made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, they couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. You know, Michael whispered to Hannah as they shared their first dance, a part of me still can't believe we're here. After everything we've been through, Hannah smiled, her eyes shining with happiness and determination. We're here because we chose to stand for what's right no matter the cost, and now we get to continue that journey together. The celebration continued late into the night, but for Michael and Hannah, it was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. In the months that followed their wedding, the couple threw themselves into their work with renewed vigor. Michael's company, now rebranded as Andrade Sustainable Development, focused on ethical, community-oriented projects that prioritized social impact alongside profitability. Their flagship project, the revitalization of Hope Village, was well underway, transforming the once struggling neighborhood into a model of sustainable urban development. Hannah, for her part, continued her work on judicial reform, now heading a national commission dedicated to increasing transparency and accountability in the legal system. Her experiences, both as a judge and as a whistleblower, gave her unique insights that proved invaluable in crafting new policies and procedures. One sunny afternoon, about a year after their wedding, Michael and Hannah found themselves back in Hope Village, touring the nearly completed community center that would serve as the heart of the revitalized neighborhood. "It's amazing," Hannah said, taking in the modern, eco-friendly building with its solar panels and community garden. "To think, just a few years ago, this area was a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system," Michael finished, squeezing her hand. "And now, it's becoming a beacon of what's possible when people come together for the greater good." As they walked through the building, greeting construction workers and future staff members, they were approached by a young woman with a familiar face. "Mr. and Mrs. Andrade," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Maria. My family was one of the first to move into the new housing units here." Of course they remembered. Maria's family had been featured in some of the early news coverage of the Hope Village project, their story of resilience in the face of poverty and displacement, touching hearts across the nation. "Maria," Hannah said warmly, "it's wonderful to see you. How are you and your family doing?" The young woman's eyes shone with pride. "We're doing great, thanks to you both. My parents have stable jobs now and I'm about to start college in the fall. I wanted to tell you that I'm planning to study law. Your story, Mrs. Andrade, it inspired me. I want to fight for justice just like you did." Michael and Hannah exchanged a glance, both deeply moved by Maria's words. It was moments like these that reaffirmed their belief in the path they had chosen. "That's wonderful, Maria," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "The world needs more people like you who are willing to stand up for what's right." As they bid farewell to Maria and continued their tour, Hannah leaned into Michael's embrace. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't taken that stand against Miller. If we had just kept our heads down and gone along with the corruption." Michael nodded, understanding her train of thought. "I think about that too, but then I look at people like Maria, at this community we're helping to rebuild, and I know we made the right choice." Their conversation was interrupted by the buzz of Michael's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression turning serious. "It's from our contact in Interpol," he said, quickly reading the message. "They think they've located Miller. He's been spotted in a small town in Argentina." Hannah's grip on Michael's hand tightened. Robert Miller, the man who had nearly destroyed their lives and whose corrupt empire they had helped to dismantle, had been on the run for over 2 years. His capture would be the final chapter in a story that had consumed so much of their lives. "What do we do?" Hannah asked, her voice steady despite the surge of emotions she felt. Michael took a deep breath, considering their options. "We inform the authorities, of course, but beyond that, I think it's time we let this go, Hannah. Miller's empire is gone, his influence destroyed. The systems we've helped put in place will ensure that someone like him can never again amass that kind of corrupt power." Hannah nodded slowly, realizing the wisdom in Michael's words. "You're right. Our fight was never about vengeance. It was about creating a better, more just world. And that's exactly what we're doing now." As they left the community center, stepping out into the warm afternoon sun, they were greeted by the sight of children playing in a newly constructed park, families chatting on benches, and the general buzz of a neighborhood coming to life. "This is our legacy," Michael said, gesturing to the scene before them. "Not taking down Miller, not the scandals or the trials. This building a future where honesty and integrity aren't just ideals, but the foundation of our society." Hannah leaned her head on Michael's shoulder, a sense of peace washing over her. "I couldn't have imagined a better outcome when I stood up in that courtroom 2 years ago. We've been through so much, but look at what we've accomplished." As they walked hand in hand through the streets of Hope Village, Michael and Hannah Andrade knew that their journey was far from over. There would always be new challenges to face, new injustices to fight, but they would face them together, armed with their love for each other and their unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. The sun was setting as they reached their car, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. As Michael opened the door for Hannah, she paused, looking back at the community they had helped to transform. "You know," she said with a smile, "I think we're just getting started." Michael grinned, feeling the same surge of excitement and purpose that had driven them through their darkest days. "I couldn't agree more, my love. The best is yet to come." As they drove away, leaving Hope Village behind but carrying its spirit with them, Michael and Hannah Andrade looked toward the future with hope and determination. They had weathered the storm, emerged stronger, and now stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The story of Michael and Hannah Andrade, once a tale of corruption and injustice, had transformed into one of hope, redemption, and the power of unwavering integrity. And as they continued their journey, they knew that their greatest chapters were still to be written.